Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Friday, May the 17th, 2024. Yesterday we got the news that Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico had been shot and seriously injured, and I did look at his chart and some other charts yesterday, and I want to continue on the theme of Robert Fico in this video. It does seem that he will probably survive. One source said that he's expected to survive. Wikipedia is saying he's expected to recover. I suppose there's a bit of a difference between being expected to survive and expected to recover. The question is, will he be able to return to his duties as Slovak Prime Minister? But I want to look at the horoscope of Slovakia. There are actually three possible horoscopes for Slovakia, three horoscopes that I like to consider. It does seem that the latest horoscope for Slovakia's separation from the Czech Republic on January the 1st, 1993 is working better than the other two. That is a possibility. But I'll be looking at those three charts. I'll also be looking at the horoscope of the man that shot him. Don't have a time of birth, but on the internet you could see his, I don't know whether it was driver's license or his identity card. We saw a picture of that, which showed his date of birth, which was, I think, March the 1st, 1953. So he was born just before Stalin died, March the 1st, 1953. I also want to consider the first debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, which is taking place on June the 27th at 9 o'clock in the evening. I think it's hosted by CNN, so that will take place in Atlanta, Georgia. So there is a question of, who's going to do best from that debate, Biden or Trump? Or is it completely meaningless? And I do want to consider Mars, because Mars does do things in a few months' time, and it affects both Biden and Trump. I am talking about this Mars quite a lot because it is this Mars-Uranus conjunction in July, and it certainly affects Trump. And I think it could affect Biden as well. So that's another thing I want to consider. But first of all, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Friday, May the 17th, 2024. So top right, there of course is Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and behind them is Robert Fico. Sorry, that's a rather uninspiring picture to put on this video, but that's the way it goes. And so what's happening today? The moon is still in Virgo. Because yesterday we had a situation where the moon was in Virgo, but it wasn't really making any aspects to anything. And so I was suggesting that might sort of lower the activity. Today we do have some aspects. The moon is in Virgo, you can see its opposition Saturn, and it is trine Venus, and it is trine Uranus. So it's quite an earthy picture. We've got the moon in Virgo. Virgo is an earth sign. And we've got Venus in an earth sign, Uranus in an earth sign, Sun in an earth sign. So with the moon in Virgo making trines to Venus and Uranus, the emphasis I think is on the material world, what things look like, how they feel, perhaps surface appearances, and details are going to be important. And maybe some of us are just not going to want to look beyond those details, and at the same time there may be a disinclination in some quarters to ask questions. You just want to take things at face value and not go really deep into things intellectually. I mean, after all, at the moment. There are no planets in air signs, unless Pluto is in an air sign. That's true. Pluto is in Aquarius, but Pluto's a generational planet. We don't count that. Likewise with the South Node, we don't count that as being contributing to the airiness or lack of it today. And so with that lack of air, we may feel a little bit stifled. We would like to be able to talk about stuff more, but it may be difficult. And if we are talking, maybe people may not listen. But people will listen at some level, because Mercury at 2 degrees Taurus is square Pluto. So when I said that there's not much talking today, I'm talking about the light kind of conversation. You consider possibilities and say that's an interesting possibility, but maybe that might be true, maybe this might be true. But we've got Mercury square Pluto. Mercury is the communication planet, and I often associate Mercury-Pluto aspects with propaganda. People trying to be persuasive, using arguments to get their way, not playing with arguments or playing with facts, but pushing a single fact, a single argument, a single view of the world, and trying to persuade people through whatever means are at their disposal that one view is the right view and everything else is wrong. So how do we deal with this? Well, it depends. Are we the ones trying to persuade, or are we at the receiving end of someone else's attempts to persuade? So we have to consider that. If we want to persuade people to do something, then we will have the opportunity. That is true. And I suppose it's not about coming up with different arguments and different choices. It's just pushing one view. And if we've got one view, remember Mercury is in Taurus. Mercury is very persistent in Taurus. It goes in one direction, keeps saying the same thing until it eventually gets its way. And of course, Mercury in Taurus is quite good at arguing, because it just goes through the facts one at a time and just it doesn't deviate, and in the end gets its way. So yes, that could be very powerful, Mercury square Uranus, if that's what you want to do. Mercury square Pluto, not Mercury square Uranus. Yeah, Mercury square Pluto can be very powerful. But what if we're at the receiving end? It is possible that some people are trying to persuade us to think something or do something. I suppose it's a wonderful day for gaslighting. Gaslighting, being forced to question our fundamental beliefs, being able, not just our beliefs, but our fundamental cognitions. No, you've misunderstood it. You didn't see it. You're deluding yourself. So watch out for that. And some of us, I suppose, with Mercury square Pluto, because Mercury might actually not feel that we can fully articulate our views. And I've already said that there's not much air today. We need a little bit of air to be able to talk about stuff very often, to get our ideas into the open. But somehow we might feel that there are heavy things going on out there, and we can't express ourselves. If we were to express ourselves, we might get ourselves into trouble. We might get attacked, and so we might feel that it's better just to keep our opinions to ourselves. I'm not convinced that that is the right approach. And what we certainly must be careful about is being gaslit, or people trying to persuade us to think something that's not true, or perhaps to buy something, or to sign on a dotted line. So we do have to be a little bit careful with that Mercury Pluto square. At the same time, Moon is opposition Saturn. That's quite an important aspect, Moon opposition Saturn. And so with Moon opposition Saturn, that may be another reason why it can be difficult to express ourselves on an emotional level, because we feel that there are heavy forces out there and we can't express ourselves. We're afraid of expressing ourselves. And so, yes, that is something to be a little bit wary of. Having said that, the Moon, having made the opposition to Saturn, makes a trine to Venus, and that's much more positive, and it allows us to relate to people. We don't have to say anything to them, but we can relate, and I think that is important. Though maybe the most important aspect today is a semi-square between Mars and Jupiter. There's Mars at 1303 Aries, there's Jupiter at 2803 Taurus. So when you've got Mars semi-square Jupiter, that might be indicative of a lot of action. People wanting to make things happen and not really caring about the consequences. And in fact, that Mars semi-square Jupiter could actually be quite violent. Remember, Mars-Jupiter contacts, particularly stressful Mars-Jupiter contacts, can often be really difficult, and they can be reckless. And we have to be careful that there isn't a sudden escalation, or that someone doesn't suddenly feel that they have to impose themselves, and so we have to watch out for that. And with that Mars semi-square Jupiter, yesterday we had the assassination attempt on Fico, which took place as the Mars semi-square Pluto was coming into orb, and I suppose we've still got the same kind of energy today. People feeling that they perhaps can't express themselves in the normal way, so they have to express themselves in a rather over-the-top and perhaps violent way. So compared with yesterday, as you can see, there is a lot more going on. And when we look at the positions of the planets from a heliocentric point of view, we notice that right now, today, there is a heliocentric conjunction between Mars and Saturn. So we've had the geocentric conjunction, but the heliocentric conjunction is right now, it's today. And it can be about death, destruction, frustration. These are some of the concepts that we think of when it comes to Mars and Saturn. And I think maybe a bit of caution is required. There was actually a heliocentric Mars-Saturn conjunction on a day that Chernobyl exploded on April the 26th, was it April 26th, 1986? There was a heliocentric Mars-Saturn conjunction. But if you look at Mars-Saturn historically, just because you've got a Mars-Saturn conjunction, you go back, it happens every couple of years, it doesn't mean to say that you're going to get huge dramas all the time. It's just going to create a tense situation, and we do have to be. I think we do have to be a little careful there. And if you're into the 15-degree series of aspects, it's a micro aspect. If you take the 15-degree series, which is it's on a sort of high-level harmonic, then it does seem that the Earth and Mars and Saturn are kind of doing something there. I mean, because you can see that Earth is square this point here, which is 27 Aquarius, and then the Mars-Saturn conjunction is 15 degrees from that square point. And I know that sounds a little bit obscure, but it is a micro aspect involving the Earth and the Mars-Saturn conjunction from a heliocentric point of view, which is in force today. And I think that might create a little bit of tension. In fact, let's look at it. Let's actually drill down a bit further on this, because you can see that Mars and Saturn are 15 degrees away from Neptune, and Mars and Saturn are 15 degrees away from the square of where the Earth squares this point here. So at this sort of high-level harmonic, from a high-level harmonic view, Neptune, Mars and Saturn and the Earth are all coming together today. And so, in fact, today might be quite complex. And I think we do have to be careful. And that could indicate events of a Mars, Saturn and Neptune nature. And remember, it all hits the Earth. And the Earth is actually where we are. So I do think that from a heliocentric point of view, it could actually be quite a difficult day. But that's the overall picture, and I do feel I should be saying more about the heliocentric chart. There is definitely stuff going on. I think we do have to be a bit careful here. Okay, so let's now look at the astrology from a perspective of the 12 signs. And I think I'm going to have more to say than I had yesterday. I think I was relatively brief yesterday. So let's go back to regular coordinate system. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Friday, May the 17th, 2024. Aries, you do feel that there is a certain amount of obligation on you to do something. And it is because Mars, which is your ruler, is moving towards a conjunction of the North Node. Now, this conjunction between Mars and the North Node is not just a one-day wonder. It will be active for the next couple of days. And so when you're considering the next couple of days, you should be asking yourself, where is the obligation? And what exactly are you supposed to be doing? Because there's something that the universe wants you to do. And Mars is about assertion. Mars is not just about sitting on the fence, waiting for things to happen, not feeling you want to make a commitment one way or the other. There's something that has to be said. Now, it could be that you are aware of something going on which you don't approve of. As far as you're concerned, it's wrong, but you don't want to get involved because it's too much bother, because it's too much aggravation. Well, I think with the Mars conjunct the North Node, there is a certain obligation there to speak up. Of course, it does depend on the situation. You don't want to intervene in a fight and get killed yourself. I mean, it can happen. So I'm not saying you should intervene without any regard for your own safety, but assuming that it's not a safety issue, that it's more of an issue of Will you embarrass yourself if you speak up? Will you perhaps lose a friend if you speak up? Well, I think in that case, I think there is an obligation for you to say something. And I think also, Aries, you're going to be able to come over as being very righteous. I know that the word righteous, has somewhat negative connotations. I don't mean it like that. I think that when you start saying things the way you see it, you'll come over as being very convincing, and your moral superiority will be absolutely clear. And not just your moral superiority, your superiority in general, your grasp of the law, your grasp of what is right and wrong, your grasp of the facts. It will all come over as being very effective. So in that sense, Aries, you really should not underestimate yourself. Turning to other people and relationships, I think things do look quite good today. I think that you do actually have a chance to get on with people. Not, I don't think in a spectacular way, but you are quite attentive to detail, more attentive to detail than usual, because Aries is not a sign that is known for its obsessive attention to detail. But I think the details will matter right now, and you'll get it right. And you will get it right in a way that does not sound obsessive. And I think that your ability to focus on, the small touches, but the touches that matter, is going to improve relationships. And so now is certainly a time, if you perhaps have had recent disagreements with anyone, or you and someone else have just drifted apart, I think in a gentle way you can bring things back together. And you just don't have to do anything dramatic. Just be yourself and do what feels natural, and I think that things should be fine. Though I should point out that the most important aspect today is a semi-square between Mars and Jupiter. And this semi-square between Mars and Jupiter can be quite dramatic. I already talked about this semi-square between Mars and Jupiter when I was just talking about the overall planetary picture. And it can be about excessive use of force, going too far. And there could be a tendency in one particular area for you to go too far, or perhaps to overreact. So if you're in a situation where you suddenly feel a burst of energy, where you feel you absolutely have to do something and you're starting to lose your rationality even, then hold back. That Mars square Jupiter could be a problem. It might also be about making a sudden decision to do something you weren't planning on doing. Might be spending money, perhaps. You just feel you have to do it. I would resist that temptation. So it's a day when things should be, in most cases, fairly slow and meticulous. Of course, if you see that there is an injustice going on, that something has to be said, yes, then you very much have an obligation, I think, to do something, and provided you're not taking any risks, except the risk of being embarrassed. But you don't want to overdo it with how much force you use. You need to use as much energy as is necessary, but not too much energy, because if you were to do that, you could cause yourself and other people a lot of damage. Taurus. So, as you know, or you might know, Mercury is now in your sign. Sort of a few days ago, Mercury went into Taurus, and it's now well established in Taurus, and it is making a square to Pluto. And I think that this square to Pluto could have an impact on you, and maybe actually quite a fortunate impact, because with Mercury in Taurus, you certainly have the ability to communicate in a slow and methodical way. And with Mercury square Pluto in Aquarius, you have the capacity actually to be very persuasive. This persuasiveness particularly applies to your work or your career, to business, the way you're dealing with the public, the way you express yourself just is very clear and is very convincing. And if there's something you want to happen that requires other people's agreement or other people to come to your way of thinking, then now is the perfect time to talk to them and in a very simple way make it clear that your way is the right way. But you don't have to say too much. It's not about bombarding people with words. It's just being yourself, and there's be something about your overall persona which will be very convincing. And I don't think that people are going to want to resist you for too long. So do take advantage of that opportunity. Unless, of course, you're up to no good. Of course, if you're up to no good, and if you're trying to manipulate people for your own selfish purposes, is that the right thing to do? Probably not. But I'm assuming that you're thinking about the world and your community and what is right for everyone. Well, I suppose there's always a place for self-interest, provided it's not actually deceptive. So you perhaps have to make a moral decision there about how far you go in terms of being persuasive. At the same time as all this, the moon is making an opposition aspect to Saturn, and it's making a trine aspect to Venus. So two very different aspects there. The moon opposition Saturn is difficult. The moon opposition Venus is, it's about being nice and pleasant and getting people on your side. I think that if you are in the Americas, you're going to more pick up on the moon trine Venus. If you are in Asia, Australia, New Zealand, it's perhaps going to be more moon opposition Saturn. So I'm sorry if you live east, Asia, Australasia, then you may have a bit of a battle on your hands, and you may find that as you try to express yourself and you try to be yourself, you might run into resistance. Somehow you've got to find a way of getting around that resistance, and it may be that there are certain people that have to be avoided. If you're in the Americas and late in the day in Europe, then you can pick up on the moon trine Venus, and that's really very nice. It allows you to be yourself and to be appreciated. And when people understand what you can do and what talents you've got, then I think they're going to want to get to know you, and in a quiet way, relationships can be stabilized, and they can become quite fulfilling. Though I should point out that Mars is semi-square Jupiter, and Mars is ruler of Scorpio, your opposite sign. So I suppose with Mars semi-square Uranus, there is a possibility that there may be just one person who you're getting on with fine, but they might want to take things too far. Or perhaps if you know someone very well and you're watching them behave and what they're thinking and planning, they might be starting to contemplate an action which is really quite unwise, or they just might overreact. So in certain cases, Taurus, you may have to be a restraining influence. Gemini. So Gemini, as you know, Mercury is your ruler. So when I'm trying to work out what's going on in the Gemini world, I do have to look at Mercury. And Mercury is in Taurus. So with Mercury in Taurus, to some extent, you want to hold back with some of your ideas. You perhaps feel that now is not the right time, that you want to wait a few more weeks until your birthday season is well underway. It's Gemini's birthday season coming up, and I'm going to be 62 on May the 30th. I don't like getting older. Geminis do not like the passing of years. Geminis, at least this Gemini, doesn't like birthdays. But it is the birthday season coming up, and early June, Mercury is going to move into Gemini, and I think that's going to really be a time when you'll have a lot to say. But right now, it's not there. It's in Taurus, and there are things that many Geminis want to hold back on, and that's fine. But today, Mercury is square Pluto. So Mercury square Pluto can be quite intense. Many Geminis are now having quite strong feelings, and the world does seem to be a difficult place. And I suppose that may be connected with Pluto in Aquarius. Perhaps some Geminis are starting to realize what it means for the Pluto to be in Aquarius, to be in a society that is completely changing, a society where technology is increasingly important, where governments are trying their hardest to control our lives and our thoughts. Our thoughts. The thought police are out in force, and it could be heavy. And there may be, for some Geminis, they really may feel that they absolutely can't express themselves because the world out there just seems so heavy. But I wouldn't worry about it too much. Firstly, Gemini, you have to recognize that what you're experiencing is what everyone else is experiencing. It's not a unique experience that Geminis have been singled out for a particular form of torture. No, that is not the case. And at the same time, because you have an understanding of what's going on and what the difficulties are, that understanding may actually give you your own special kind of influence. So I understand that you may feel that you have no influence today, but actually you do have far more influence than you realize if you're prepared to exercise this influence. And it's perhaps about influencing the world around you in a sort of behind-the-scenes way. You don't have to be out there expressing yourself in a directly. In fact, that would be disastrous. That's not the right approach, not the right way for handling today's energies. But if you can be subtle, make suggestions, be a little bit devious. It's all about hints. And, sometimes Geminis can find it difficult to be subtle, but try to be subtle. Try to act behind the scenes to slowly make people come round to your way of thinking. And I do really think that is something you can do. And subtlety is important. Being a little bit deceptive and indirect. I think it really is the best way of making sense of today's energies, and in the end feeling that you can actually do something useful. And Gemini, you mustn't feel that there's anything that you actually have to do in a sort of a dynamic sense. You can slowly assert your influence, and you will get your way. I mean, Geminis always get their way, but they get their way in the sense that Geminis decide they want to do something. They decide that something else is boring. They don't make a fuss about it. They get their way just by being themselves. And just when it comes to the crunch, they're just not there, because Gemini has gone somewhere else because they've decided they just don't want to do it because it's boring. But they don't make a fight about it. That's the key point. Don't have a fight about it. If you don't have a fight about it, then you're not giving people an opportunity to block your progress. You just sort of get through. And that's often how Gemini works. I'm not sure if I've expressed that very well. But yes, I think that is the point. If you just refuse to have a conflict, refuse to have an argument, refuse to get into the situation where you tell someone, no, I don't want to do it. You just do it your way, and you do it you say as little as possible, and in the end, you do get your way. And that's probably the best way of handling the day's energies. Cancer. Moon is your ruler. The moon is your ruler, and the moon is in Virgo all day long. So with the moon in Virgo, you are quite attentive to detail. Has to be. You can see what's happening on a material level. I think that from a financial perspective, you will understand what's going on. You'll understand what the financial implications of everything will be. So if you're taking any action, you can just naturally know how much it's going to cost and whether or not you can afford it. And you don't have to make a big deal about it, but it may be that some Cancerians can just instinctively know how to save themselves money. Though you also are aware that you and other people have quite a lot to negotiate. And the issue here is that the moon is making an opposition to Saturn and is making a trine to Venus. So what happens is the moon makes an opposition to Saturn, then it makes a trine to Venus. So that moon opposition Saturn is probably going to be more of a feature if you are a Cancerian who is, for example, in Australia or New Zealand or the Philippines or Kamchatka. If anyone listens to this from Kamchatka or Vladivostok, probably not, but or Japan. So if you're an Australasian or East Asian Cancerian, I think you're very much going to be picking up on that moon opposition Saturn, and you're going to be aware that there is a conflict situation potentially. It's perhaps about you and someone else who just do have a difference of opinion, and that difference of opinion does have to be negotiated. And you shouldn't take it too seriously. It's a difference of opinion, but once it's negotiated, once you and someone else have understood why you disagree, then you can move on, and perhaps, tomorrow you can start to take advantage of a trine between the Moon and Venus, where you and someone else can really you can find some common ground. Now, if you are in the Americas, that Moon opposition Saturn is something from the past. You are moving away from that Moon opposition Saturn, and you're moving towards that trine of Venus. If you're in Europe, you're kind of moving from one to another. Your sort of first half of the day is probably more Moon opposition Saturn. Last half of the day could be more Moon trine Venus. So it does depend to a certain extent on your location. But the point is, Moon opposition Saturn followed by Moon trine Venus. Now that means wherever you are, if you have had a disagreement with someone, and you keep going, and you keep being positive, and you keep trying to find common ground, I think it's very likely that you will eventually find common ground. And that is that's going to be really useful, and I think that's going to be certainly very good for your social life. And I think that you can make good contacts at the very least, maybe good friendships as well. Now, another thing happening today, or at least starting to happen today, is that Mars is moving towards a conjunction of North Node. I think I mentioned it yesterday. So with Mars moving towards the conjunction of a North Node, it's a very high-profile conjunction, as I did mention yesterday, very high profile. It's not exact today, but it's going to be exact over the next few days, and you are going to be starting to feel its influence. And the pressure there is to be seen, to be heard, and to make your influence felt. And in certain cases, Cancer, over the next few days, you should be ready to exercise a certain amount of leadership. Maybe other people don't know what's going on, they're confused, and it's up to you to take that kind of leadership. I think it's something that you don't really want to do. It's because it's too much effort. But I think in this case, I do believe that it is correct. So don't be afraid in that direction. And it's what the cosmos wants. And so if the cosmos wants it, who are you to say no? Okay, you can say no if you want. You are a Cancerian, and in many cases, Cancerians don't like to be told. Leo, you're feeling a bit reserved, I think. You feel that some things have just gone too far, and maybe that it's time to perhaps disengage a little. And I suppose you're starting to perhaps see some perspective on maybe certain situations and certain relationships, and you're maybe taking the view that maybe it's gone on for far long enough, and now it might be time to disengage. And I can understand that. You have to be realistic. Everything has a shelf life, and that includes relationships, particularly short-term relationships. If you've met someone over the last few days or few weeks, you might have had useful interaction with them, but now it's perhaps time to move on. Perhaps an awareness that it's time to fade. What was it? Was it a 60s phrase? It's sort of bad scene cats, let's fade. So it might be a bit like that. Bad scene's cat. Well, yeah, you're a cat. There is a bad scene, Leo, and perhaps you need to fade a little. But it's not that bad. It's just not bad. It's just a scene that has perhaps become redundant. It's starting to stagnate a little, and perhaps it's time to move on. Though, in terms of other things going on, you must not forget your obligations. And I'm thinking particularly if you're working, if you've got any social, societal responsibilities or business responsibilities, there's useful stuff you can do. After all, the moon is in Virgo. It's in a sign that, from a Leo perspective, is quite connected with money. And that moon is making an opposition to Saturn, and it's making a trine to Venus. And, okay, that opposition to Saturn can be about realizing that something financial is perhaps more complicated than you'd thought, and you're going to have to go out of your way to sort it out. But probably you don't want to sort it out. You probably want to just leave it alone. But I don't think that's the right strategy. There are ways to resolve it, and I think the best way to resolve it is to engage with people, to explain the problem, to say, look, we've got a problem here, something needs to be discussed. And you might think that they're not going to care, they're not going to want to involve themselves, but I think you'd be wrong there. I think that if you do have anything that is bothering you, that something perhaps you've noticed that other people have noticed, but other people haven't noticed, then I think that now would be a very good time to be bringing the subject up, because I think you will get a sympathetic response, and that will just resolve the matter. Now, one other thing I should say is that when thinking about what's happening, what should be done, sure, it's natural to engage with other people, and that's a good thing to do, as I've just said. But you do have to understand that some people are really, really persuasive. If you give them a chance, if you start talking to them, they can be really persuasive, and they can get you to change your mind. They can get you to completely sign up to their view of the world. And if that's happening, you do have to be careful. If you start to realize that you're being led in a particular direction which you weren't planning on going in, then you need to back off and realize that you're being manipulated. So while it's true that you really should be engaging with other people, especially in a career and work setting, just be careful about certain people who can be hyper persuasive. They are there, and as soon as you find yourself changing your mind because of what someone else is saying, and then you need to sort of pinch yourself and think, hold on, something's going wrong here. So be aware of that, and in the end, the person that makes your decision should be you, not someone else. But you're a proud Leo. You knew that, didn't you? You know that, don't you? So overall, Leo, I think it could be a useful day. And if something is wrong, if something is bothering you, then talk to people, and I think you'll get answers, but don't allow yourself to be manipulated. Virgo. Mercury is square Pluto, and Mercury is your ruler. So it's quite possible that that square between Mercury and Pluto may have quite a commanding impact. So how's this Mercury-Pluto square going to work? Well, there are two ways in which it can work. It is possible that you want to keep to yourself, that you don't want to tell people what you're thinking, because that's one manifestation of Pluto. It hides things. I mean, remember the Pluto myth. Persephone was dragged down to the underworld by Hades, by Pluto, and had to spend 6 months of the year in the underworld. And that's Pluto wanting to drag people down into some dark place. And I suppose in terms of this Mercury square Pluto, it's just not wanting people to know and not wanting to engage. And I suppose retreating perhaps into your personal underworld and taking the view that this is part of your 6 months. This is a phase where you don't really want to express yourself, tell people what you're thinking, because you're afraid about the response and you might feel that you're going to compromise yourself. That's one way Mercury square Pluto can work. But the trouble about Pluto is Pluto, perhaps more than the other outer planets, can be so ambiguous because it can so easily do the opposite. And the opposite of that Mercury square Pluto is you doing the persuading. If you want to be, you can be incredibly persuasive and you can get people to do things your way. And I think you're going to be able to do that by just focusing on things that are peripheral. There's someone who thinks they know what they're doing, who's very confident, and then you come along and you say, well, hold on, did you consider this? Or did you consider that? And maybe, what about that detail there? And you bombard them with all these suggestions, and not suggestions, but these, maybe they actually could be little pernickety criticisms. That's a part of the Virgo stereotype, having pernickety criticisms. And by making subtle criticisms, and you can actually undermine people if you want. You can undermine their confidence in what they're doing. And they perhaps reach a stage where they're thinking, well, hold on, what am I supposed to be doing? And then Virgo, you can have your own ideas about what they should be doing. So yes, you can be very persuasive. But maybe persuasion should start at home. Before persuading other people about what is right and wrong, you should be doing a bit of self-persuasion, thinking about what is right, what is the right set of principles to be running one's life according to. Do ask yourself that question, and perhaps you need to try persuading yourself that one set of principles is the right set of principles to be following. And if it's the wrong set of principles, then your powers of self-persuasion are not going to work. Particularly because you're a Virgo. You're a Virgo. You understand the flaws in things, and I think that you want a set of guiding principles that is sufficiently flexible to deal with exceptions. So Virgo, that is something that you need to perhaps to concentrate on. But I don't want to say that it's a bad day. I think it actually is quite a good day. After all, Virgo, the moon is moving through your sign, and it is making a trine to Venus, and it's making a trine to Uranus. And so with that moon trine Venus, I think that if you can just relax and just be yourself, people are going to like you, and they're going to find you, I think they're going to find you interesting. You can be gently persuasive. You don't have to be totally tyrannically persuasive. You can be gently persuasive, and I think that people will find that interesting, and they will find that appealing, and I think that you can get your message across very well. And it's perhaps a time, Virgo, where you need to reach out to people who have a slightly different view from your own. I mean, you can hang around with the same people forever, and that's nice, but are you actually moving on? If you actually want to move on as a person, then it may be a time where you need to just reconsider who you're talking to, who you're mixing with, who you're socializing with, because socializing with someone who has a completely different background from yourself, who perhaps might be a foreigner or from a completely different location. Of course, it could be a long-distance communication. That is a possibility. But by doing that, I think you're going to be enriching yourself in a big way. Libra, you perhaps feel that now is just not the right time. In general, now is not the right time. That the right time is in the future, but it's not today. And I think that is understandable, because many Librans are going to want to have a low profile, and they're going to be aware that it's really difficult to make an impact. And I think that, if you try to communicate today, it's going to be hard work. Remember I said right at the beginning of this video, when I was talking, having my overall introduction to the planetary situation, that there isn't any air. I mean, okay, there's Pluto in Aquarius, true. There's South Node in Libra, but that doesn't really count as air. The air signs are very underrepresented today, and air represents movement. And I think that you're very much feeling the fact that there is no air. It's just difficult to get your message across, and if you do try to get your message across, it's almost like Mercury is retrograde. Mercury is not retrograde, of course, but it almost feels like Mercury is retrograde. Messages get delayed, people don't get back to you, people aren't clear about what they want, and you just may feel that it's all just a waste of time. But maybe, Virgo, you just need to recognize that there are different ways of communicating, and the spoken word is not the only way of communicating. And we notice that astrologically, the moon in Virgo is making a trine to Venus, and Venus is your ruler, and it is moving towards a conjunction of Uranus as well. So that moon trine Venus does allow you to express yourself, but not perhaps verbally. It's more about just being yourself and just knowing that you are connected, and you are not as isolated as you feel. You are, you have links with other people, and you can communicate just by being there, and just by being yourself. And provided the line of communication is open, it doesn't, just because the line of communication is open, it doesn't mean that that line of communication has to be used. And I think that you are more visible than you realize. And at the same time, there is something brewing under the surface, Libra. It's difficult to express, but there is a growing sense of excitement, a sense that something has to happen. And that is because Venus, which is your ruler, is starting to make a conjunction to Uranus. Now, that conjunction between Venus and Uranus is not going to be exact until the weekend, but you can very much feel it, that you really want something to happen. Right now you can't see how it can happen, but it's very real. And maybe what you're waiting for is for the moon to move into Libra. Now, the moon currently is in Virgo, but very soon the moon will be in Libra. And I think that is something to look forward to. So have confidence. Just because you can't say something today does not mean that you're not going to be able to say it tomorrow. And people know where you are. I mean that in a positive sense, not a threatening sense. People know where you are. People know that you exist. And the lines of communication are all open. And I think you're in a strong position, stronger than you realize. And also you understand that soon enough something will happen, and that something will be to your benefit. But that event is probably not about today. Today is perhaps a day for just biding your time. Scorpio. Probably the most important aspect today is a 45-degree aspect between Mars and Jupiter. So Mars is in Aries, and it is making a 45-degree aspect to Jupiter. So Mars is your ruler. That is you trying to make things happen. After all, Mars is in Aries. It's conjunct the North Node in Aries. You very much feel that the time for action is now. But at the same time, you want to go through the logical steps. You don't want to do anything that is too hasty. And the importance of self-control and self-discipline really, is clear to you. Yet, with Mars semi-square Jupiter, that could encourage you to overreact. Remember, Jupiter can exaggerate what it touches. So if you have got Mars semi-square Jupiter, there is some danger that you just overreact. You see that something's going on, and you decide that now is the time to be putting a huge amount of energy into it, and you end up perhaps putting too much energy into it. And that Mars-Jupiter semi-square may be about relationships, maybe about how you're relating to one other person or perhaps a group of other people, and they do something that you feel requires a response, and the moment you respond, things start to escalate. And once that escalation starts, it may be very difficult to stop. So if you are tempted to do something dramatic today, think about it and try to play it through in your mind. How is it actually going to work out? And are you going to get the results that you were planning on? You may get far more than you thought, and you may get into a situation that is quite difficult to control. But that's only one side of what's going on at the moment. The moon's in Virgo. Virgo is a sign that has quite a good relationship to Scorpio. They're two signs apart. Virgo and Scorpio, they've got Libra in the middle. And so with the moon in Virgo, it's a time, all things being equal, where you're feeling quite calm and you're feeling quite sociable. And the moon, while it's in Virgo, is making an opposition to Saturn and a trine to Venus. So there may be moments, particularly at the beginning of the day, particularly if you're in Asia or Australasia, or East Asia, or Australia, New Zealand, where you may find it a bit difficult to get on with people, perhaps because you feel your own priorities need to be given precedence, and perhaps your own creative priorities. There may be just a feeling that your creativity and other people's demands just cannot be reconciled. But I think you can find a reconciliation. And the moon, having made this opposition to Saturn, it makes a trine to Venus. And that moon trine Venus, okay, you're going to feel it certainly in the Americas, later in the day in Europe, perhaps tomorrow if you're in East Asia, Australia and New Zealand. But that moon trine Venus, moon trine Uranus is, I would have said, quite exciting and quite uplifting. And you'll feel that you really can benefit from other people, that other people are not holding you back and not actually getting in the way of your creative endeavors. And it's about knowing how to relate, and you can relate. And I think that if you are socializing, you're going to meet people who you just have a very immediate rapport, not necessarily an exciting rapport, but there's just useful interaction. And I think from a social perspective, especially in the Americas, it could be an extremely successful day. So this evening, for example, don't hold back. Maybe there's something you can do this evening, something fun, something involving other people. That would be a very good way of using today's energies in a constructive manner. Sagittarius, you continue to be in the mood where you feel that you want to make things happen. And more so than yesterday. I think yesterday you felt that now was the time for action. But you might have been disappointed yesterday. Just yesterday may have been difficult to get things off the ground. I do think that today it will be easier, because there is some sense of application. It might have felt yesterday that you just weren't applying yourself to anything, that there was nothing to kind of get your teeth into. But today I think there is plenty to get your teeth into. And you should, if possible, do things. And perhaps you should try to cover a lot of ground. And it's not going to be done in a way that is, I think, particularly spectacular, but it's just about getting solid results. After all, the moon is moving through Virgo, and from a Sagittarian view, Virgo is a high-profile place, high-profile sign. Virgo, you want to get attention. You want your endeavors to be taken seriously, and the moon is making a trine to Venus. And so with that moon trine Venus, it's also moon trine Uranus. And with that moon trine to Venus and Uranus, you are able to have an impact. And I think you're going to be very good at organizing people. So if you want people to do things at particular times, you'll be able to tell them what you want, and I think they'll understand what you're trying to achieve. So don't be afraid of moving people around, telling them what to do. I think they'll actually quite like it, because there is a certain amount of confusion going on today, and people don't quite know what's going on. And if you're there to provide some clarity, I think that will be much appreciated. Though, Sagittarius, you should be aware that the main aspect today is a semi-square between Mars and Jupiter. So Jupiter is your ruler. So if you have Mars semi-square Jupiter, then all things being equal, there is some danger of a little bit of anger and aggravation. After all, Mars is the planet of anger and aggravation, and something may suddenly get you annoyed. You think you've got everything organized, everything's in place, and then suddenly something happens that you perhaps hadn't really counted on, and it doesn't fit in, and you get angry. And then there's the question is, what do you do with your annoyance? You don't have to tell people that you're annoyed. Don't have to express it. You can just sit on it if you can. But you're a Sagittarius. You like action. Once you get stirred up, it's difficult to stop. Difficult to put the genie back in the bottle. And you then have the question is, how do you use an excess of energy? It could just come from nowhere. So it's very important that you have an outlet. If you do have a burst of energy, try not to take it out on other people. Try not to spoil things, by getting annoyed, or perhaps by saying something tactless, or by saying something that upsets people. It's easy to do with that Mars semi-square Jupiter. Additionally, I should point out that Jupiter is in Taurus, and from a Sagittarian eye, Taurus can actually be connected with health. And so Mars semi-square Jupiter might mean that you take something too far at a physical level and end up doing yourself an injury. I'm not saying it's going to happen. As I like to say, my job as an astrologer is perhaps to look at things from the worst possible view, because by looking at things from the worst possible view, I'm giving you an idea of all the bad possibilities, and then you can take steps to avoid them. I mean, that's the way it should be, isn't it? So, don't do anything that requires excessive physical energy. Don't lift heavy objects. Don't walk around carelessly on uneven surfaces, for example. Don't do something that in the past has caused physical damage. And that way, I think you'll be able to avoid some of the negativity, the sort of physical negativity of Mars semi-square Jupiter. And with Mars in Aries, it's just possible that something you do that you enjoy doing, that you want to do, that is quite physical and involves exertion, something you almost take for granted and you like doing, you could engage with it and hurt yourself. That is a possibility. So be very aware of your body and your body's limitations today with that Mars semi-square Jupiter. I'm sure nothing's going to happen, but I just felt I had to give you that warning. Capricorn. It's looking good for Capricorn, I think. I think that there is quite a lot of energy flowing, and it's energy that I believe that is pretty fortunate. And it's because the earth signs are activated. While it's true that there's nothing in Capricorn at the moment, there is stuff in the other two earth signs, which are Virgo and Taurus. So you've got the moon in Virgo, and the moon is making a trine to Venus and Uranus in Taurus. And so that trine is having an impact on you, on Capricorn. Capricorn is the empty earth sign that's picking up on the energy. And I think that you will be able to do a lot today, because I think that things are going to be easier than expected. So you might have thought that something was going to be difficult and you don't want to do it because it seems a real drain on your resources. But if you actually go and start doing it, then it's going to be much easier than expected, and you're going to be able to cover a lot more ground than you expected. And so do take advantage of that. And in terms of where that ground is, I think we're talking about things that you want to do. We're not talking about what other people want you to do. You can be quite playful in a way today if you want to be, and your creativity, I think, will be much appreciated. And in terms of social situations, you're going to be very natural. Although I'm going to put a rider on that. It's not entirely true. There's one-to-one relationships could be an issue, particularly early in the day, but I'll just come on to that. But generally speaking, when you're dealing with people in general rather than individuals, I think that things are flowing very well. Now, the problem is that the moon is making an opposition to Saturn. So Saturn is your ruler. The moon is ruler of Cancer, which is your opposite sign. And that moon opposition Saturn, okay, it's more a feature early in the day, more a feature if you're in Australia or New Zealand or Japan, East Asia. But I think to an extent all Capricorns will feel it, because you have got moon in Virgo, opposition Saturn in Pisces. And so with that opposition, it just may be that when dealing with someone as a person, on a one-to-one level, you just may be aware that there is a difference. And that difference could really be very stark, at least on the surface. But you have to ask yourself, what is that difference about? And it may be about just what you believe in. There are things that you believe in that are very important to you, but there are also things that another person believes in which are even more important to them. I mean, Capricorns can be realistic about beliefs. Yes, they do have beliefs, but they've got to be practical. You may be dealing with someone who has strong beliefs, and those beliefs are an issue. And because of those beliefs, there may be a clash. But it's just important that you don't take it too seriously, because, as I've just said, the moon does make a trine to Venus. What happens is that the moon makes an opposition to Saturn, and then it moves to a trine of Venus and also to a trine of Uranus. So maybe there's a resolution here. It's just accepting that you and someone else have different priorities, but in the end, it doesn't matter, particularly if you're able to focus on something real, because beliefs are not real. in a sense. They don't mean anything. Everyone has their own beliefs, but what do they mean? Do they account for anything? Probably not. And if you can engage in something real, which is not about beliefs, it's something absolutely material. And if you can engage in some joint activity that's totally material, that's totally grounded with another person, then in a sense that will transcend beliefs, and you'll see that however different you are in terms of you and other people, you do have sufficient common ground to continue with whatever relationship you happen to be. Though it is just important that you are flexible, that you don't get tied to any idea about the way things should be, that you're open to possibilities. I think that is important. With the moon is in Virgo. The moon in Virgo is about perhaps looking at all of the details, and when you look at all of the details, you realize that you haven't got it entirely right, and that a few changes are required here and there, and that in turn can lead to a change in your attitude. And I think that a change in attitude could be something very fortuitous. Aquarius, you are a little bit serious today. I think you were quite serious yesterday. You perhaps are more serious today than you were yesterday. I think that you take the view that the world is a bit heavy. That's reasonable. That if you move outside your comfort zone, that maybe bad things could happen, because you don't feel that you understand things sufficiently. And I think this, the more you understand, the more you see what's really going on deep down, the more unsure of yourself you actually are. But I mean, that's not the way it should be. I mean, what's happening today, and I think yesterday to an extent, you are uncovering information that may be factual, it may be emotional, and it's forcing you to reconsider. And that, I believe, is a good process. It's something that is healthy. And while this is going on, Aquarius, you are starting to see some of the sort of rot around you. Again, it's not personal. It's just about what's going on around us in this world, and you can see the rot. And it's quite surprising when you see the rot. It's disturbing, and it's surprising, and it comes from nowhere, and you just say, wow, things really are bad. But again, not for you, just to the world in general. And so there is that sense of realization that I think that you are experiencing. And maybe it's connected with maybe it's also connected with Pluto being in your sign. It does matter, the fact that Pluto is in Aquarius, and particularly on a day like this, when you've got Mercury square Pluto. And I think that with this aspect between Mercury and Pluto, you are capable of some really quite deep thinking about what it is to be you and where you fit in with it all. And it's a kind of deep thinking that in the first instance might be disturbing. I mean, deep thinking is often, very disconcerting when you start to realize the way things really are. But I think that in the depths, you can start to understand what it's all about, and also get a sense of perspective. And what you should recognize is that, with Pluto in Aquarius, you are in a powerful position, and part of your power is knowledge and being able to have the kind of deep thoughts that other people are just not prepared to have. Maybe they take the view that, when ignorance is bliss, 'tis folly to be wise. That might be an approach, but it's not your approach. You're not given that sort of relief that, being ignorant. It can be wonderful being ignorant, but unfortunately, Aquarius, you're not ignorant, and I suppose you have the curse of knowledge, or perhaps the curse of wisdom, and perhaps that's what's going on, and it may be one of the reasons why you're feeling a little bit negative today. But would you really like to be in a position of ignorance? I think probably not. And you are an Aquarius, and being an Aquarius, you can be quite independent-minded, and you can be a little bit detached. And I think that sense of detachment is going to be further encouraged by some people's attitude. So in terms of relationships, I'm not really thinking about close relationships, but more peripheral relationships, perhaps relationships that have been developing over the last few weeks or months. There may be a sense that those relationships are maybe coming to an end, or some connection. Perhaps you've had a lot to do with someone, and that connection's coming to an end, and that ending may not be initiated by you. It may be initiated by the other person. Perhaps another person has realized that it's time to move on, and that you are not part of the future. But again, I'm not talking about the important relationships. I'm talking about the relationships that you can afford to lose. But don't be offended if someone takes that view that you are surplus to requirement. It does happen. Maybe you just become too heavy for them. I suppose that's possible. Maybe they've realized who you are, and they don't want anything more to do with you. Or maybe you and someone else, you came together for a reason, and that reason is over, and so there's no real reason for you to be connected anymore. But I'm not trying to upset you there. I'm not talking about. I must emphasize that I'm not talking about anything really dramatic. We're talking about relationships that are fundamentally peripheral. So that really is the broad picture. I'm not saying it's going to be a bad day. I mean, after all, the moon is making a trine to Venus, and that moon trine Venus is going to be particularly useful if you understand your own limits, if you're in your own space. I think you're going to feel very comfortable in your own space. I think that with moon trine Venus, I think that you can benefit from your family. I think you and your family will have good relations, provided you don't try and do anything dramatic. It's not a time for family expeditions to the wilderness or to exciting places. No, it's not that kind of thing. It's more about just being in your own space, you and your family being with each other, and not having any expectations of each other. Then I think that things will be fine. But just don't be too ambitious today in terms of actual activity. And remember, tomorrow's another day. The moon is in Virgo. Virgo is a sign that Aquarius finds it difficult to relate to, and tomorrow the moon will be in Libra, and things will be different. Pisces. Pisces, you do understand that you're not alone. And that's because the moon is in Virgo. And I think when I was talking about what was going on yesterday, I was suggesting that you understood the importance of people, but at the same time, there wasn't much evidence that other people were available. It's like you were waiting for something to happen, but maybe nothing was happening. And that was because there was no application. There were very few aspects yesterday. Today there are aspects. The moon is making an opposition to Saturn. The moon is making a trine to Venus. The moon is making a trine to Uranus. And so what's happening is the moon makes makes an opposition to Saturn, then it makes a trine to Venus. So in terms of relationships, it is a case of all's well that ends well. Just because something starts on an unsatisfactory note doesn't mean that it's going to end that way. And so moon opposition Saturn, you're going to perhaps be feeling that more if you're in Asia, Australia or New Zealand. Moon opposition Saturn, you might just feel that something is blocked, that perhaps you and someone else have nothing in common, or it may be that you are actually doing the blocking, that you are quite resistant to change and someone wants to do something and you are just digging your heels in. That is a possibility. But if you can stay with the situation, that moon opposition Saturn will eventually lose its strength and you will move from moon opposition Saturn to the moon trine Venus. And you're really going to be picking up on that moon trine Venus if you're in the Americas and perhaps later in the day in Europe. That moon trine Venus is going to create some action in terms of relationships, that you and other people will be able to get on with each other, will be able to get beyond your differences, and there may actually be some excitement because Venus is making a conjunction with Uranus, and the moon is making a trine to Venus and making a trine to Uranus. So it may be that a relationship that seems ordinary, seems unspectacular, can really suddenly burst into life. And so make sure that you allow that to happen, that you create the opportunity for it to happen, if that's what you want. I suppose if you aren't looking for excitement today, then maybe you should either avoid other people or don't spend too long with them. Remembering also that the main aspect today is a semi-square between Mars and Jupiter. So Jupiter is your ruler. Jupiter rules Pisces. And Mars is certainly an energizing influence. And so with Mars semi-square Jupiter, something may excite you. Something may turn up which makes you feel that action is required. Now, that Mars may relate to money, because Mars is in Aries, and in the Pisces chart, Mars is a sign that is connected with finance, and it is possible that today something might bother you in terms of money, and you feel that something has to be done and something has to be said, and it won't wait. And if that's the way it is, that's what you have to do. Though make sure that your own behavior is appropriate. You have to think, what are you trying to achieve? So if something financially crops up and you feel action is required, ask yourself, what do you actually want? What would you like to happen? And given this, what behavior is appropriate? And then you can really use focused energy to get what you want financially. But if you lose your focus, then it's just a mess. It's just an angry Piscean getting nowhere. Though I should say it may work the other way. It may be that someone else is annoyed about money, or something bothers, some financial issue bothers them, and maybe they just suddenly ramp up out of nowhere. But overall, I think that there could be a financial issue today which crops up that no one is quite expecting. It's Friday, it's the end of a week. People were not expecting people to suddenly become concerned about money. But yes, they might suddenly become concerned about money. So be aware of that and be prepared. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And I now want to look at today from the perspective of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Friday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And I got a single hexagram, and it didn't move. And that single hexagram is obstruction. That doesn't quite gel with the astrology. It sort of emphasizes the moon opposition Saturn, moon opposition Saturn, which, if you were listening to my forecast of the 12 signs, I was thinking it would be more about early in the day, more if you were in Australia and New Zealand. But it seems that moon opposition Saturn is perhaps stronger than I realize, at least if the I Ching is reflecting this moon opposition Saturn. And so obstruction means that, we're trying to get something done. We're going to be successful in the end, but we hit a short-term block. And the advice here is, when we hit the obstruction, we need to stop what we're doing. We need to pause and perhaps even retreat. That is a possibility. Not necessarily, but at a very minimum, we need to stay where we are and perhaps get some help. There's no disgrace in getting help. So if we're engaged in something and things suddenly aren't working and we just want to carry on with what we're doing, firstly, we have to lengthen the timelines. It's not going to be achieved as quickly as we had thought, but yes, we may need some assistance, and that could make the difference. Now, in order to understand this hexagram obstruction, it can be useful to look at the nuclear hexagram. And the nuclear hexagram is the hexagram the nuclear hexagram is when you knock off the top line and you knock off the bottom line, and then you look at the fifth, fourth, and third line, and you make that the top trigram, and then you make the second, third, and fourth lines the bottom trigram, and that gives you hexagram 64. So can you see it? There's hexagram 64, just to show you the original one. So those three lines here, when I've knocked off the top, those three become the top trigram, and those bottom three after you've knocked off the bottom line become the bottom trigram. So that gives us before completion, which gives us a sense of the underlying picture. And so the underlying picture here is of trying to cross a river, and we're halfway across, and the question is, are we going to be able to get to the far bank? And we're probably running into a bit of difficulty here. And the image that's given is of a fox that gets its ornamental tail wet by the river, and once the tail gets wet, the fox gets dragged down. And so we don't want to get dragged down. It's before completion. It's not the job hasn't been done yet. But this is the underlying hexagram. This is what's going on. We're trying to get. This is a nuclear hexagram. It gives us a sense about what this obstruction is all about, and it is about trying to cross the river. And we're running into a bit of trouble here, and there is an obstruction, and we have a choice. We can turn back, or we can stay where we are and wait for things to improve and perhaps get some help. To perhaps, someone can throw us a rope. So that's today. It's just a hexagram for one day. It's certainly not saying you're not going to be successful. Obstruction. It's not saying it's not failure. It's just there's a hiccup, and once we realise there's a hiccup, we can perhaps take some action, and that action would be either getting help, staying where we are, or we could retreat to where we started. In extreme situations, that might be the right thing to do, but you have to consider it and weigh up the situation as you find it. Now I want to go back to the astrology, and I did want to say a few more things about the shooting of Fico. So here is Fico's chart. I'm not really going to say anything about his chart in particular. I'm sort of more concerned to begin with about who shot him. So the person who shot him was a man called Uri Scintula. And Uri Scintula was born on March the 1st, 1953. And so you can see that Uri Scintula has a T-square. There's Uri Scintula's T-square, Uranus opposition Chiron, with Mars on the midpoint. So how does that work? So Uri Scintula was born March 1st, 1953. That was like a week before Stalin died, I think. And so Uri Scintula, over his life, would have seen a lot of changes in his country. He would have seen the sort of de-Stalinization. Well, as a child, I suppose he might have seen de-Stalinization. Then he would have seen the Prague Spring, and then the Russians invading Czechoslovakia as a teenager. Then he would have seen the fall of communism and change. And that might be how Chiron opposition Uranus is working. Now, for him, that change just might have been really troublesome, and he's trying to cope with it. And how does he cope with it? Well, he copes with it through his Mars. So he's got Mars on the Chiron-Uranus midpoint, and so he doesn't quite know how to deal with it, and so he responds in a violent way. And of course, he had access to a gun. Apparently, he was a poet and a security guard, and I suppose he's retired. And I think apparently that's quite common in Slovakia. I mean, probably like America, people need extra income, so they work as a security guard. And he has access to a gun because of his job. You can see, I suppose, poetry, Mercury on skeet. Mercury is about communication, but it's on skeet, so the fixed star connected with disaster and shipwrecks. I wonder how good his poetry really was. And that might be that aspect of him. He was born at a time of a full moon. We don't know exactly how strong his full moon was because I don't have a time of birth. But, anyone born on the full moon is just having to deal with, I suppose, Sun in Pisces. I suppose you could say that is the chaos of the society in which he's living. And then the moon in Virgo is sort of trying to make sense of it all. And by the way, we know he was born on March 1st, 1953 because of his identity card or his driving license. I'm not quite sure which one it was. Daily Mail had a picture of it and gave his his birth has been 1/3/1953. That is, of course, the European format. You go day, month, year. And this is the situation when he did the shooting. So I didn't find any absolute exact aspects. Mars was moving towards a conjunction of his Mars, so he's moving towards a Mars return, but it wasn't exactly there. Neptune has been fairly close to his Mercury. Apparently he made the decision to shoot Fico the moment Fico got re-elected, which was a few months back. And so I suppose with Neptune around his Mercury, we can think about all his ideas and delusions that might have been going through his mind when in the run up to the shooting. So that's his chart. I mean, I don't think that there's anything amazing there, but I do think that T-square involving Uranus and Chiron with Mars on the T is really going to be quite important. And remember, he's a Pisces. Now that's an important point. Now, turning to the horary I asked. So I asked this horary question, yesterday when I was doing a video, and I just heard about it. I asked, what is Robert Fico's condition going to be like? Now, remember, when you're doing a horary question, you ask the question. It's me subjectively asking the question. It's the birth of the question. I take the place I am at. And this is a chart I got. And in this chart, you can see that I am the ascendant. I'm asking the question, so I'm the moon in Leo. Fico is a prime minister. He's a politician. So I take him as ruler of the 10th. Now, if he'd been an archbishop, I would have taken him as ruler of the 9th, because the 9th rules religion. If he'd been some random person, I don't know who they are, then I don't have any relationship to them. They're just someone, then I would take him as ruler of the 7th. But because he has a role, a position, ruler of the 10th, I take him as Jupiter. You always, of course, use traditional rulerships. So he is Jupiter, and he is combust. So combustion is the worst condition a planet can be in. It's bad. He has been seriously injured. His life may be threatened, particularly as the ruler of the 8th house is on the 10th, is on Aquarius. Saturn rules Aquarius, so ruler of the 8th is on the 10th. You might associate the 8th with death. But from what I hear, his condition is stable. People are saying he's not going to die. So where is the mitigation here? I think if there is a mitigation, it would be perhaps from the moon. Yes, the sun is moving towards a conjunction of Jupiter, but before the sun makes the conjunction to Jupiter, the moon makes a square to Jupiter. And so the moon is a square, the moon making that square to Jupiter and then making a trine to Mercury. That might be some kind of mitigation. Now, as far as the assailant is concerned, the assailant is another person, this other person who we don't know who it is. It's the 7th house cusp and its ruler. And the ruler of the 7th house is Saturn, which is Saturn on the midheaven. So there's the assailant, Saturn in Pisces. And of course, as we know, having just looked at Urias and Scintula's chart, we know that he was a Pisces and Saturn is in Pisces. So that kind of fits. So now I want to just consider the impact on the country. I mean, clearly, if you're a country and your prime minister has just been shot, assassination attempt, that is a really big deal for the country. And you would expect that to show up. So when looking at the Slovak horoscope in previous videos, I I considered three possible charts. One possible chart for Slovakia is the 1939 chart, when Slovakia, well, didn't really become an independent country. It was basically a puppet state of Nazi Germany. And so this is the time when the Slovak parliament in Bratislava voted for independence. But it was a fake independence in a way, because it was a vassal state of Germany. But still, it's a chart that one should consider. And here are the transits to the chart at the time of Fico's shooting. And the transit that stands out is, if assuming we've got the time right, I got a Slovak source, that it was 12:07 p.m. So, assuming that time is right, and we've got a midheaven of 2436 Pisces, we have Uranus we have Saturn and Neptune very close to the midheaven, but the Saturn-Neptune midpoint is conjunct the midheaven, and so you can understand the confusion and chaos of Saturn-Neptune hitting the midheaven, hitting the Prime Minister. And that would seem to work quite well. You might also notice that Uranus is sextile the midheaven, Sun is sextile the midheaven. That Sun-Uranus conjunction hitting the midheaven. I know we think about sextiles as fortunate aspects, but perhaps that was another reason why he was shot when he was shot. So there's something going on with the 1939 chart. Another chart I like to look at is a chart of the Slovak national uprising, which was, again, an attempt to assert Slovakia's independence, this time against Nazi Germany. And there was an uprising. It was unsuccessful, but at the same time, it has an important place in Slovakia's history. And I think many Slovaks do see it as the sort of the beginning of their country, particularly those on the left. And I believe it took place at 8 p.m. In Banska Bystrica. So Banska Bystrica is, that's the hospital, that was where I think Fico was flown to. And there is the ascendant at 23 degrees Pisces. So if we look at the chart, so the ascendant at 23 Pisces is where the midheaven was in the chart for the 1939, when you had a sort of fascist Slovakia as a vassal state of Germany formed. So, and again, we've got Saturn and Neptune. The midpoint of Saturn and Neptune is on the ascendant, and it's hitting Venus. Venus was in 23 Virgo at the time of the Slovak national uprising. So we do seem to have something going on. The third chart is the chart of modern Slovakia. January the 1st, 1993, when Slovakia had this amicable split from the Czech Republic. And so here is the chart, January the 1st, 1993, stroke of midnight, Bratislava. And what is interesting about this chart is that we have, because it was at midnight, whenever you've got your New Year chart, you've got the sun at 10:33 Capricorn, the IC, right on the IC, 11:43 Capricorn IC, so sun on the IC, there's a midheaven, 11:43 Cancer, and there's Mars at 11:25 Aries, on Slovakia's descendant, quite close to Slovakia's moon, because remember, look at the moon has got eight Aries. Slovakia also has Jupiter rising, so it's actually on Slovakia's moon-Jupiter midpoint. So the moon, Mars, is hitting Slovakia's descendant, it's hitting its moon, it's hitting the midheaven, and it's hitting the midheaven, and so it's the midheaven is leadership. It is the leader. It is Fico. And so Mars hitting the midheaven would be the attack. And so I think that does fit very well. And so for the attack, I would have said that the modern 1993 chart for Slovakia does seem to work best. Then I want to move to the United States, and I want to consider the debate. So CNN has announced that they're going to have a debate between Biden and Trump, and that's going to be on June the 27th at 9 p.m. So here is the chart for the debate. And it's going to be in Atlanta, Georgia. And this chart, I don't know how exciting it really is, because the moon is void of course. The moon is void of course in the sense that the moon has made its last aspect its last major aspect to a traditional planet before leaving the sign. Now, a traditional planet means you don't count Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Yes, the moon is making a sextile to Uranus, and it's making a conjunction to Neptune, but these are outer planets. And so this might mean that the debate, really not much is going to be going on. That it might not have any implications for the results of the election. And I just quickly wanted to mention the charts of Biden and Trump and see how they're affected by the debate. So here is Donald Trump's chart, and in terms of the debate, Mercury in Cancer is quite close to his Saturn. That could be a little bit of a problem. Is he going to be able to really express himself how he would like? On the other hand, the moon is at 25 Pisces, so it's going to be trine his Venus. So this is an opportunity for Trump to show the human side of his personality. And that moon sextile Uranus again hits his Venus. So Uranus sextile his Venus, moon's trine his Venus. So maybe this is a time for Trump to show his humanity. So that might be a possibility there, though he does have to watch that Mercury conjunct his Saturn. In terms of Biden, this is Biden's chart, how Biden might be affected by the debate. Main thing I would have said is the fact that Mercury, you can see Mercury is at 2152 Cancer, and it is exactly trine his Mercury. So there's a Mercury trine Mercury. Now, two ways of looking at that. Now, you could say that's really good because Biden is going to be going to be able to express himself, a free flow of his feelings, and that's going to look really good for the debate. On the other hand, Biden is known for his verbal gaffes, and maybe the words will just completely flow and the gaffes will completely flow and he just won't be able to help himself. So it'd be interesting to see how Biden's Mercury trine Mercury is working. Finally, I want to make a very brief mention of the Mars-Uranus conjunction, which is happening on July the 15th, 2024. I've talked about it in terms of Ukraine, but I wanted to talk about it as far as... I've also talked about it in terms of Netanyahu. But what about Trump? How does it affect him? Now, this Mars-Uranus conjunction is at 2619 Taurus. Now, let's look at Trump's chart. This Uranus-Mars conjunction is right on Trump's midheaven, and it is square his Mars, very close to the square of his Mars. And I think Trump has to be careful in July, and probably for the rest of the summer, but it could be that he makes a catastrophic mistake. And given the fact we'd seen what's happened to Fico, I think that at the same time his security has to be really good at the time of that Mars conjunct. Uranus, and that whole of July with Mars and Uranus hitting his midheaven. That could be about being. You could see that Mars conjunct Uranus close to his midheaven, square his Mars, being attacked, an assassination attempt in public. So he does have to watch out for that. Now, to be fair, I should also point out that this Mars-Saturn opposition does hit Joe Biden. Joe Biden has got his sun at 27 Scorpio, so there's going to be, he's going to have, over the summer, I think Uranus goes direct, stationary retrograde at 27 Taurus, so that hits Biden's sun. Plus, in July, he's going to have Mars and Uranus. He's going to have, not as strongly as for Trump, but in July he also is going to have Mars and Uranus causing him problems, so this time hitting his sun, so he has to be careful as well. And that's really all I wanted to say for today. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you found this video interesting. If you enjoyed this video, I would be very grateful if you were to like it. If you are not subscribed, of course, be really, really grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.